Friday evening, 6:47 p.m. My husband kissed me on the cheek. He said, "Don't wait up, flight's at 9. I said, "Safe travels." I watched his car pull out of the driveway. Then I opened my phone. The GPS app loaded in 4 seconds. A blue dot appeared on the map. I watched it move. Left on Atlantic Avenue, right on Court Street. And then it stopped. 20 minutes from our front door. 20 minutes. Not Chicago. Not an airport. Not even the highway. 20 minutes away, in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. I put my phone on the kitchen counter. I poured a glass of wine I did not drink, and I thought about 8 months of Friday nights. My name is Claire Weston. I am 33 years old, and the 20 minutes between my front door and my husband's other life is the distance that ended my marriage and started everything that came after. My name is Claire Weston. I am 33 years old. I have lived in New York City for 11 years. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut called Guilford, the kind of coastal town where the houses are old and the people are comfortable, and the biggest ambition available to you, if you let the town do the dreaming for you, is to marry someone local and stay. I did not let the town do the dreaming. I left at 18 for NYU, and I have never lived anywhere else since. I work in publishing, acquiring editor at a mid-sized literary imprint. I read manuscripts for a living, which means I spend my professional life looking for the moment in a story where something shuts, where what the reader thought was true turns out to be something more complicated, and recognizing that moment before anyone else does. I am, professionally, quite good at noticing when a story isn't what it appears to be. It took me 8 months to notice it in my own. My husband's name is Marcus Weston. He is 37 years old. We met through mutual friends 6 years ago at a dinner party in the West Village, the kind of dinner party where there are too many people for the table and not enough chairs, and someone always ends up on a windowsill, and somehow that's exactly right. Marcus was charming in the specific way of men who are good with people, not flashy, not performing, just genuinely warm in a room in a way that made people lean toward him. He was in finance, private equity, the kind that doesn't get dramatized in movies because it's mostly spreadsheets and conference calls. He was good at it. He made good money. He traveled occasionally for work. We dated for 2 years. We got married 4 years ago. We bought a brownstone in Park Slope 2 years after that, the kind of Brooklyn neighborhood where the coffee shops have exposed brick and the farmer's market is on Saturdays, and you can walk to Prospect Park and the whole thing feels most of the time like a reasonable argument for staying in New York forever. For 3.5 years, our marriage was, I have to be careful here, because I don't want to either romanticize it or retroactively poison it more than the truth warrants. Our marriage was good. Not in the movie sense, not passionate in a way that other people could see, in the quieter, more durable way of two people who have built something together and find most of the time that they genuinely like each other. We had dinner parties of our own. We had a dog, a 4-year-old beagle named Otto, who still 8 months later sometimes goes to the door at 6 on Friday evenings and waits. We had a life. And then, 8 months ago, the Friday trip started.
The first Friday was in March. Marcus came home that Thursday looking tired. Not physically tired, I thought, but the specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying something and is recalibrating how to carry it. He told me over dinner that he had a last-minute trip to Chicago, a private equity deal that needed in-person meetings Friday through Sunday. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it's the weekend." "It's fine," I said. "These things happen." It was fine. These things did happen. In 5 years of being with someone in private equity, last-minute travel was not unusual. I believed him without a second thought. The second Friday was in April. Chicago again. The same deal, still ongoing, still needing his attention. He came back Sunday evening looking tired in the same specific way. I made dinner. We watched something. We went to bed. Still fine. The third Friday, early May, was when something first moved in me. Not suspicion, exactly. Not yet. More like the feeling you get reading a manuscript when you sense somewhere in the structure something that doesn't quite fit, a sentence that works on its own but creates a slight dissonance with the sentences around it. The thing that didn't fit was this. Marcus never talked about Chicago. 5 years of work travel, and Marcus had always talked about the cities. Not extensively, but naturally. The restaurant where the client dinner had been, the hotel gym he'd found, the specific misery of O'Hare on a Sunday afternoon. He talked the way people talk when they've actually been somewhere. He didn't talk about Chicago. He talked around it. I noticed. I filed it away. I kept reading. By August, 5 months in, I had a folder in the back of my mind that was getting heavy. The trips were now almost every Friday, sometimes 4 Fridays in a row without a break. The Chicago deal had been ongoing, apparently, for 5 months, which was not impossible for a private equity transaction, but was longer than usual and had a quality, when I tried to think about the details, of carefully constructed vagueness, details that existed but that somehow, individually, didn't accumulate into a picture. Marcus had become slightly better at performing normalcy, and I had become slightly better at performing not noticing, and neither of us said anything, and the Fridays kept coming. It was September when I bought the GPS device.
I want to tell you about this decision precisely, because I think people have a lot of feelings about it, and I want to be clear about my own. I did not buy the GPS device because I was certain. I bought it because I needed to stop not knowing. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from living in a state of sustained uncertainty about something important, where your mind keeps returning to the same unresolved question, the same set of facts that don't quite add up, the same folder getting heavier. It is not dramatic, that exhaustion. It's quiet. It accumulates. I had been accumulating it for 5 months. I ordered the device online on a Thursday afternoon. It arrived Friday. Marcus was in Chicago that weekend, which meant I had the house to myself. I spent 40 minutes on YouTube learning how to install it, and 5 minutes actually doing it. The underside of the rear bumper, specifically, behind the license plate, a small magnetic device the size of a deck of cards. Then I waited. 2 more Fridays passed. I checked the app both times. The car moved normally. Work, the grocery store, a friend's place in the Heights on a Saturday afternoon. Normal. Nothing alarming. I started to think I'd been wrong. I started to think with a specific relief that I am almost embarrassed to admit that the folder in the back of my mind was filled with a story I had constructed out of fatigue and anxiety and the general low-level paranoia of someone who had spent too many hours alone on Friday nights, listening to the city and thinking too much. The 3rd Friday with the device in place was in October. Marcus came down for breakfast looking already slightly somewhere else, a quality I had learned over 8 months to read, but had never, before September, needed to read at all. Flight's at 9, he said. Should be home Sunday evening. Okay, I said. Safe travels. At 6:47, he kissed me on the cheek and walked out the front door. I stood in the kitchen for 30 seconds. Then I opened the app. 20 minutes. Friday at noon. I did not buy the GPS device because I was certain. I bought it because I needed to stop not knowing. I let myself know what that meant. I watched the blue dot move in real time. Left on Atlantic Avenue. I told myself, he's heading to the BQE. That's the way to the airport. The dot did not take the BQE. Right on Court Street. I told myself, maybe he's stopping for gas, maybe dinner before the flight. Court Street has restaurants. The dot stopped. I zoomed in on the map. Carroll Gardens. A specific block. A specific building. I looked at the address for a very long time. Then I did what I do when I need to understand something. I researched. I found the address in about 20 minutes. Not because it was particularly difficult to find, because New York City real estate is surprisingly transparent when you know where to look. The building was a 4-story brownstone on a quiet tree-lined street. Converted to apartments in the 1990s. 4 units. I searched for rental listings, current and archived. Found a listing from 7 months ago. A 2-bedroom apartment, 2nd floor. Monthly rent, $4,200. 7 months ago. 2 months into the Friday trips. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and my untouched glass of wine, and I thought about $4,200 a month for 7 months, which is $29,400, paid by a man who had told me 7 months ago that he was going to Chicago for a last-minute meeting. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect tears at this part, and I didn't have them.
What I had instead was something colder and more clarifying, the specific sensation of a story that has been half told for 8 months, finally arriving at its actual shape. The shape was this. My husband, for at least 7 months, had been renting an apartment 20 minutes from our home and living a second life inside it. I closed the laptop. I called my best friend Nadia. She answered on the second ring. I could hear a TV in the background, a Friday evening at her apartment in Astoria. "Hey," she said. "What's up?" "Nadia," I said. "I need to talk. And I need you to not say anything until I'm done."
Nadia came over. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus and I had eaten dinner 4 hours ago, where he had been slightly somewhere else, and I had watched him be somewhere else and said nothing, because I had been doing that for 8 months. I showed her the GPS app, the address, the listing. She looked at the screen for a long time. 7 months, she said. "At least," I said. "Claire." "I know. What do you want to do?" I looked at the blue dot, still stationary on the Carroll Gardens block. 20 minutes from where we were sitting. 20 minutes from 4 years of marriage and a brownstone in Park Slope, and a beagle named Otto who still went to the door on Friday evenings and waited. "I want to know everything," I said, "before I do anything. I want to know the full picture. And then I want to make sure that when this ends, it ends on my terms, not his." Nadia looked at me for a moment. "Okay," she said. "What do you need?" "A very good divorce attorney," I said. "And a few more Fridays." I called the attorney on Monday morning. Her name was Rebecca Sohn. She'd been recommended to me by a colleague at the publishing house. Not because my colleague had needed a divorce attorney herself, but because, as she put it, if I ever did, Rebecca Sohn is who I'd call. She's thorough. Thorough turned out to be an understatement. Rebecca's office was on the 40th floor of a building in Midtown. Not flashy, not aggressively corporate, but the kind of space that communicates precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows, bookshelves lined with casework, a desk that was impeccably clear in a way that suggested everything was being handled somewhere you couldn't see. Rebecca herself was 53, with a particular kind of attention, the kind where you feel, sitting across from her, that she has already thought 3 steps ahead of whatever you're about to say. I told her everything. The Fridays, the GPS, the address in Carroll Gardens, the lease I'd found. 7 months, 20 minutes. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to think about it before you answer, because your answer shapes everything that comes next. What do you want out of this? Not emotionally, practically. What outcome, when you look back on this in 5 years, would make you feel like you handled it correctly?" I thought about it honestly. "I want to be treated fairly," I said, "which I haven't been. I want what I'm actually entitled to under the law, and I want him to not be able to tell himself or anyone else that this was something that just happened, that it was just a mistake he made, a thing that got complicated, that he's sorry about. I want the actual scale of it to be documented, so that when it's over honestly." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Then the most important thing you can do right now," she said, "is nothing that tips your hand. Keep living normally, keep the GPS in place, and," she leaned forward slightly, "start building the financial picture. Every account you have access to, every document, every statement. Not to take anything, just to know exactly what exists. Because in a divorce, the single most powerful thing is information. And right now, you have more of it than he knows." Over the following 3 weeks, I built the picture. I want to describe this carefully, because it is the part of the story that required the most from me. Not emotionally, surprisingly, but practically. A sustained, deliberate, methodical kind of attention that I think people underestimate when they think about what it means to prepare for something like this. Marcus and I had joint accounts: checking, savings, the mortgage account. We also each had individual accounts that predated our marriage. Standard, unremarkable. What was less standard was what I found when I started looking carefully. Marcus had a brokerage account I hadn't known about. Not a marital asset technically, it predated us,
but one that had grown substantially during our marriage, during which time we had filed joint taxes and shared expenses, and I now understood his private equity income had been supplemented by a woman who paid half of a $4,200 monthly rent in Carroll Gardens. He had a second savings account, small but separate, the kind of account you open when you need to move money in a direction you don't want your spouse to notice. He had, over the course of the past 8 months, I found this in credit card statements I'd never had reason to look at carefully before, the secondary card he used for work expenses, spent approximately $41,000 that did not correspond to any business purpose I could identify. Restaurants in Brooklyn, furniture stores, a jewelry purchase in August that I was not the recipient of. I photographed every statement, every document, every record. I uploaded them to a personal cloud account and sent copies to Rebecca. The One More Friday was not for information. I had the information. The One More Friday was for something else, something that I've thought about a lot in the time since, trying to understand why it felt so necessary. Rebecca had told me it wasn't legally required. Nadia had gently suggested it might be unnecessarily complicated. My own rational mind acknowledged that everything I needed was already in place: the attorney, the documents, the GPS, the full picture. But I needed to see it. Not the apartment, not even him specifically. I needed to see the building. The specific brownstone in Carroll Gardens where Marcus went on 23 Friday evenings over 8 months, believing I was at home in Park Slope, walking auto, eating dinner, assuming the story he'd told me. I needed to stand in front of it. The Thursday before the last Friday, I drove to Carroll Gardens alone. I parked on the block. I looked at the building. It was, objectively, a beautiful building, the kind of well-maintained brownstone that costs a great deal of money and looks like it has always been there and always will be. There were window boxes on the second floor, flowers, late fall, but someone had planted mums, orange ones, the hardy kind that last into October. Someone had planted window boxes in the apartment my husband paid for. I sat in my car for 19 minutes, and then I drove home.
The last Friday, November. I had spent the week packing, not everything, just his things, precisely and practically, not angrily, not with the kind of performative destruction you see in movies, methodically. His clothes folded, his books boxed, his toiletries in a clear plastic bag, because I am someone who folds clothes and puts toiletries in clear bags, and that is simply who I am, even when my marriage is ending. 4 suitcases, 2 boxes, the contents of the life he kept in our house, minus what was mine, minus what Otto's was, minus everything that had ever actually belonged to our shared life, and therefore, by any reasonable accounting, to me. I loaded everything into a rental van on Thursday evening, while Marcus was at what he described as a late dinner with clients. He came home at 11. The boxes were in the guest room, behind a closed door. He didn't notice. Friday morning. He came down for breakfast looking exactly as he always looked on Fridays, slightly elsewhere, already inside the story he was about to tell me. "Flight's at 9, he said. "Chicago." "I know," I said. He kissed me on the cheek. He walked out the front door. I watched his car pull away. I waited 12 minutes, long enough for him to be far enough that our paths wouldn't cross. Then I loaded the suitcases into the rental van. And I drove to Carroll Gardens. The building looked exactly as it had 2 weeks earlier. The mums in the window boxes were still there, a little more weathered, the way mums get in late November, but still orange, still present. I parked in front. I unloaded the suitcases and the boxes onto the sidewalk. It took 4 trips. I arranged them neatly, not dramatically, not symbolically, just placed them in front of the building store, where they would be immediately visible to anyone approaching from either direction. I attached a note to the largest suitcase. 1 sentence. I won't tell you exactly what it said, because that sentence belongs to me, but the substance of it was, "I know where this is. I know what this is. Don't come home."
I drove back to Park Slope. I returned the van. I walked Otto. I called Rebecca. "It's done," I said. "I'm ready." "Good," Rebecca said. "I'll file Monday." My phone rang at 7:14 that evening. "Marcus." I did not answer. He called 4 more times that night. I did not answer any of them. He texted at 9:23 p.m. "Claire, I need to explain. Please call me." I need to explain. I thought about 8 months of Friday evenings. I thought about flights at 9 and don't wake up, and the specific way he had said Chicago for 8 months, the practiced casualness of a word he'd had to make ordinary. I did not call him. At 10:15, he texted again. "Where are my things? Claire, I need to talk to you. This isn't how this should happen. This isn't how this should happen." I thought about that sentence for a while. He was right, technically. This wasn't how it should have happened. What should have happened was that he tells me the truth. At some point in the 8 months he had to do it, in any of the 23 Fridays he chose not to. What had happened instead was that I had spent 8 months in a story with a missing chapter, found the chapter myself, and decided how to end the part that was mine to end. I texted back once. One sentence. "You'll hear from my attorney Monday. Please communicate with her directly going forward." I put my phone face down. Otto jumped up onto the couch next to me. I put my hand on his back. We sat like that for a long time. Rebecca filed Monday morning, as planned. What followed was not a single dramatic confrontation, but the long, methodical, occasionally grinding process that divorce actually is, when one party has spent 3 weeks building the financial picture, and the other party has not known the picture was being built. I want to be honest about this part, because I think stories about divorce often skip it. The paperwork, the depositions, the back and forth between attorneys, the specific tedium of watching something that took years to build get itemized line by line. It was hard. I don't want to pretend it wasn't. Not because of Marcus. My feelings about Marcus had by November become something more like clarity than grief. I was not devastated. I had been devastating my own story quietly for 8 months, and I had run out of the emotional resources for devastation by the time the attorney filed. What was hard was the administrative weight of it, the sustained attention it required, the way it sat on top of the rest of my life, my job, my friends, Otto, the brownstone that was in both our names and needed to be either bought out or sold. Marcus hired an attorney. His attorney was, Rebecca told me neutrally, not thorough. The discovery process, the formal legal phase where both parties disclosed their financial assets, was where the documents I had spent 3 weeks compiling became what Rebecca had told me they would be, the most powerful thing in the room. The secondary savings account, the brokerage account, the credit card statements, $41,000 over 8 months, for a life that was not mine and had been funded in part by our joint income. Marcus's attorney objected to the credit card documentation. Rebecca anticipated every objection. She had, as she later told me with what I had learned was her version of satisfaction, prepared extensively for their objections, because they were predictable. What emerged by the end of discovery was a financial picture that was larger than I had expected when I started. Marcus was, it turned out, substantially wealthier than the version of himself he had presented to our marriage.
I need to explain something about New York State divorce law, because it matters for what happened. New York is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally, but fairly, with the court considering a range of factors. Separate property, assets owned before the marriage or received as inheritance, is generally protected. What is not protected, what the law treats very specifically, is dissipation of marital assets. Dissipation means spending marital money on something that benefits only one spouse at the expense of the marriage. $41,000 spent over 8 months on a second apartment and the life inside it, paid in part from a credit card that was serviced from our joint account. That is dissipation. The brokerage account, which Marcus had not disclosed in the initial asset inventory, and which Rebecca found in the documents I'd provided, that became the center of the case. I won't take you through every procedural step, because there were many, and most of them are not interesting to anyone who hasn't personally sat in a conference room watching attorneys negotiate the value of a 4-year marriage. What I will tell you is that the settlement, when it came, 5 months after Rebecca filed, was what she described to me as good as it was ever going to get, and better than most. The brownstone. I kept it, buying out Marcus's equity at a valuation that the court found fair, and Marcus's attorney did not successfully contest, in part because the dissipation finding had shifted the equitable distribution calculation in my direction. A portion of the brokerage account, mine, on the grounds that it had appreciated substantially during the marriage, during which time our joint finances had supported Marcus's ability to maintain and invest it. The credit cards. Marcus was held responsible for the Carroll Gardens-related charges. I am not going to tell you the total dollar figure, because it belongs to me and I've made peace with it being private. What I will tell you is that when Rebecca called me with the settlement terms, and I sat at my kitchen table, the same kitchen, the same view out the window of the Park Slope Street, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Relief. The specific, uncomplicated relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally, officially, set it down. The woman in the Carroll Gardens apartment, I've been careful throughout this not to say much about her, deliberately, because here is what I know about her and what I've decided to do with what I know. Her name is Lauren. She is 29 years old. She works in marketing. She lived in that apartment with Marcus for 7 months, apparently believing that he was separated from his wife and that things were moving toward a formal resolution. I know this because she called me once. Not to fight, not to apologize. About 6 weeks after the papers were served, after Marcus had presumably told her what was happening, she called from a number I didn't recognize, and I, for reasons I couldn't entirely explain at the time, answered. She said, "I don't know what to say except that I'm sorry. I knew he was married. I didn't know. I believed him when he said it was already over. I'm not sure why I'm calling. I think I just needed you to know that." I listened to all of it, and then I said, "Lauren, I appreciate you calling. I want to say something, and I want you to really hear it. He lied to me for 8 months. He lied to you for 7. We're both just people he lied to. What you did contributed to something that hurt me, and I think you know that. But I don't have space in my life for anger at you specifically. I'm saving it for the paperwork." She almost laughed, a startled, slightly tearful sound. Yeah, she said. "I'm so sorry, Claire. Take care of yourself," I said. I hung up. Otto was looking at me from across the room with the specific expression of a beagle who doesn't understand phone calls, but understands that something has happened. "It's okay," I told him. He jumped up onto the couch. I think he believed me. The final settlement documents arrived on a Thursday afternoon in April, 5 months after Rebecca had filed, 8 months after the first Friday in March when I had believed my husband was going to Chicago. I signed them at Rebecca's office. She handed me a pen, ordinary, ballpoint, nothing ceremonial. I signed every page where my signature was required. It took 11 minutes. When I was done, Rebecca shook my hand. "You handled this exceptionally well," she said. "I mean that. The preparation you did at the beginning. That's what made the difference." I thought about 3 weeks of photographing documents while Marcus went to Chicago that wasn't Chicago. I thought about the GPS device, still in my car's baggage compartment, which I had removed the week before, and which now sat in a drawer in my kitchen, a small magnetic rectangle, the most useful $47 I had ever spent. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." I walked out of her office. I took the elevator down 40 floors to the street. I stood on the Midtown sidewalk in April, New York doing what New York does in April, busy and indifferent and beautiful in spite of itself. And I thought, okay, what now? What now turned out to be more ordinary than I'd expected. That's the part nobody tells you about, I think. The part after. You build towards something for months. The GPS, the attorney, the documents, the settlement, and then it's done. And you're standing on a Midtown sidewalk in April, and the city is just going about its business,
as it always does, with complete indifference to the fact that something in your life just ended and also, somehow, started. I went back to work the Monday after the settlement. I sat at my desk. There was a manuscript on my computer that I'd been in the middle of when everything started. A novel, a debut, a woman in her 30s navigating a marriage that was quietly falling apart. I had been finding it a little slow before. I found it, when I went back to it that Monday, considerably more interesting. I acquired it. It published the following spring. I won't tell you the title, but it did well. The author in her acknowledgments thanked me for seeing what was really there. I've been told I framed that in my edit letter. Some things, I suppose, you learn by living them. I stayed in the brownstone. This was not an obvious decision. There were people in my life who suggested, gently, that starting fresh somewhere new might be easier, and I understood the logic. The brownstone had been our home. It had been a shared life, assembled piece by piece in the specific way that couples assemble lives. The couch we'd argued about, the kitchen renovation we'd done, the garden in the back that Marcus had been meaning to redo for 2 years and never had. But here is the thing about a home, which I have come to understand more clearly now than I did before. A home is not really the person who lived in it. A home is what you made of it, the routines you built inside it, the specific quality of the light on a Tuesday morning, and the sound of the street outside, and the way the garden looks in May. Those things were mine. They had been mine the whole time. I kept the brownstone. I redid the garden. Not because Marcus hadn't, because I had wanted to for 2 years, and there had always been something else, and now there wasn't. I planted roses along the back fence, the kind that take a season to establish and then come back year after year, without being asked.
Nadia and I had dinner last month, a Wednesday, Italian place in Carroll Gardens, which I had decided to reclaim, the same way I'd reclaimed the restaurant on the night of the settlement, by simply going there and ordering pasta and letting the neighborhood be a neighborhood again, instead of the location of something. We were halfway through a bottle of red wine when she asked me something she'd apparently been sitting on for a while. "Do you think," she said, "that if you hadn't found the GPS app, if you'd never done any of this, if you'd just confronted him directly, that first Friday, asked him to his face what was happening, do you think it would have gone differently?" I thought about it honestly. "He would have lied," I said, "and I might have believed him. Or I would have believed him enough to doubt myself, and then I would have spent another 8 months in the same state, knowing something and not knowing anything. So the GPS was the right call." "The GPS," I said, "was the only way to find out something true, in a situation where the person who was supposed to tell me the truth had decided not to. It wasn't about catching him. It was about not being the last person to know my own story." Nadia looked at her wine. "I'll handle Rachel," she said, using the wrong name, mixing my story up with something else momentarily. Then she shook her head. "Sorry, I mean, he handled things. He decided what you could know and when." "Yes," I said, and then I decided I'd handle things differently. We finished the wine. We split the check. We walked home through Carroll Gardens, past the brownstone on the quiet tree-lined block with its window boxes now empty for winter, waiting for spring. I looked at it without stopping. Then I kept walking.
Marcus lives in New Jersey now. I know this because a mutual friend mentioned it once, in passing, the way people mention things they assume you know, and then realize mid-sentence that you didn't. He lives in Hoboken. He is, apparently, doing fine. I have no feelings about this that require much attention. Not happiness, not resentment. He is a person who lives in Hoboken and makes choices, and those choices are no longer anything to do with me, which is, on balance, the best outcome available. Lauren, as far as I know, is still in New York. I don't know where. I don't know what happened between her and Marcus after November. I've thought about her occasionally, not with anger, as I told her on the phone, but with something more complicated. The particular feeling of knowing that two people were in the same situation from completely different angles, and that the harm was real regardless of how much each person understood of what they were participating in. Otto is 11 now,
He still goes to the door sometimes on Friday evenings. I've stopped trying to explain it to him and started just sitting with him at the door for a few minutes until he decides nothing is coming and goes back to the couch. Some habits outlast their reasons. That's just how it is. What I know now, almost 2 years out from that Friday in October, the GPS app, the blue dot that stopped 20 minutes from my front door, is something I've spent a long time trying to put into words because it seems important, and also because, professionally, I spend my life looking for the sentence that says the thing directly. Here it is. I was not wrong to need the truth before I could act. That's the thing I've had to defend most, actually, in the time since. Not to anyone else, but to myself. The part of me that wonders still whether there was a version of this where I simply asked the question directly and something different happened. But here's what I know from 2 years of thinking about it. The GPS didn't tell me something Marcus would have told me if I'd only asked. The GPS told me something Marcus had decided, for 8 months, that I didn't need to know. The information existed. The question is just who controls it, and when, and why. I chose to control it myself. I don't know if that was brave. It didn't feel brave. It felt like the only thing available to me that was honest. I have a manuscript on my desk right now. A new one, a different kind of story. One that's taking me somewhere I didn't expect when I started reading it. I picked it up on a Sunday morning without knowing anything about it, and by page 20, I was completely certain. Sometimes you know. You just have to let yourself know it. The blue dot stopped 20 minutes from my front door. I let myself know what that meant. And I'm still here. Thanks for listening.